Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you all here for what's obviously going to be a very, very special hour of remembering the amazing Frances Butler. And this is part of our Fiberworks Then and Now series. We've been planning this for quite a while. So today we're going to spend the next hour having an amazing conversation and looking at amazing work with Gyongy Laky, Alastair Johnston, Marla Weinhoff, Chere Lai Mah, Greg Castillo, and Debra Rapoport. So how amazing is that? Gyongy Laky, founder of Fiberworks Center for the Textile Arts, over to you.
Thank you. These are two wonderful posters of Frances that I found as I was thinking about what I wanted to say. Frances, oh Frances, a visionary, an extraordinary intellect, a brilliant and immensely talented visual artist whose art and teaching touched, inspired, influenced, and encouraged many. And my hair is standing up as I say those words. Frances was teaching at UC Berkeley when I was a student there. And in 1969, while I was there, she opened Good Stuffs in Emeryville, and we were all astounded, amazed, and delighted, and started collecting fabrics that she printed. On that poster at the bottom, it says, samples to 10,000 yards. I love that. And then it ends with, we do good work. And yes, it was good stuff. It was good work. I returned from a UC postgraduate year in India, and that was in 1972. And toward the end of the year, I found the space to open Fiberworks, which opened in early 73. And Frances was one of the first exhibitions there. It was a wonderful exhibition called Tablecloths, but nothing like a cloth on a table. These were, next slide, please, flat fabric prints transformed into sculptures. Next slide, please. And this, we were delighted. It was so inspiring, and to see printed fabrics doing a very different thing. It was very inspirational. Late in the fall of 1973, this is a more personal story. Jonathan and Frances bought their first purchased home in Berkeley, Carlton Street, which remained their home. And Tom and I moved to what they had been renting before. Next slide, please. This was the little home, 2911 Adeline, which we loved. And they had certainly left their good vibes in it. However, tragedy struck in 1974, New Year's Day. A drunk hit their car. Jonathan died immediately or very soon after, and Frances went to the hospital for some time. My brother Matt moved into her home and helped outfit it to help her healing and her recovery a little more easily, and lived with her for a while. Next slide, please. But Frances, being so resilient, she bounced back. And in 1974, she did a workshop called Graphic Representation of Verbal Communication. And in Nippon Moon Landing, which is in the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Institution collection, donated by Professor Mark Tribe, you can just see that representation of graphic and verbal being so extraordinary. Then 1975, please, next slide. She was, maybe you can go back one, but it doesn't matter. Actually, it doesn't matter. So I was, okay. Well, something is happening here, but let's go on. No, go back one. Sorry about this, but tech. If you can return, yes. So I'm searching around. I gave away all the wonderful fabrics that I had of Frances as I was searching around. I found a book published in 1975 about artists and how they lived in this area. And I had a section in it. And lo and behold, I look at one of the images, and there is a Frances pillow. Yes, a pillow. Next slide. And Frances also had a series of aprons. This is Tom's apron we purchased in 1975. It was well-loved, is well-loved, is well-used. Wonderful meals were made around this great apron. Next. In 1976, Frances again was so wonderful. She created our poster to announce the membership announcement that Fiberworks made to add a membership to all the people that were signing up for classes and wanted to be more engaged. And she also gave a wonderful slide talk called Personal Impulse and Public Imperatives. You'll see down below, oh no, I don't know if you can see it. My brother Matt gave a little workshop on converting to metric. We all know how that went. Next. So Alastair and Frances had an exhibition at Fiberworks called A Bale of Direct Contraries, the Pultoon Press. And Pultoon, I had to look that up. An utter coward is the translation. Again, so like Frances, so like Alastair. They were quite a team. Next. So I kept searching. Oh, this is a good example of the exhibition that they did together. And next, please. So I searched and searched, and finally online, I found some zebra prints. Frances did a number of prints of animals, but all sorts of things, trucks and boats and airplanes. I found a few online being sold on Etsy, and zebras. And if you look at that image of the studio of Fiberworks, and next, please, you'll see it was adorned for some time with one of her wonderful prints of zebras. Next, please. And also she created a poster and a brochure for our first sort of major event. It was art couture with about 50 artists and their beautiful clothing. It took place in Patricia and David Strauss's fabulous home on Tunnel Road. Next. In 1978, I was hired at UCD, so I spent less time at Fiberworks, but Frances kept participating, doing wonderful things. In 1979, her book, Colored Reading, wonderful little book, published. Next. Also in 1979, I reviewed an exhibit of hers. I forget where it was. The review was printed in Art Week. Can't find a copy of it, but I loved the title and I loved the exhibit, Three-Dimensional Typography. And as I said, Frances was inventing and innovating and creating and doing unusual things over and over and over again. Also in 1979, another article by Del McComb for the Davis Enterprise. Del McComb began with, "She's a sparkler, shooting off ideas, energy, strong opinions with gusto." Such a good description of Frances. Frances at the time was teaching at both UC Davis and UC Berkeley. She was a person of unlimited, enormous energy. Next. In the fall of 1980, she gave a talk, Artist Books, because that was the theme of the exhibit coming up. Next. And you'll see the diversity of the kinds of designs she created. This was a little brochure, a little catalog for a faculty exhibit that happened in 1981. Next. And that's Frances, I think, from the prom. I think we were asked to have early photos of ourselves. And at the top, she writes, "Scrappling about among the invisibilities." Next. My page, and I don't know quite why I chose one where I am hugging a bear. Anyhow, in the 1980s, I launched a project with Frances Joanne Stabb, who was on the faculty then, to create a separate department, which became the Department of Environmental Design, and now is the design department that has grown and developed tremendously since then. Worth a visit, definitely. Next. I looked on Wikipedia because Alastair has done a remarkable job posting many bits of information and photos and wonderful background about Frances on Wikipedia. And lo and behold, at the bottom of the list, one of the earliest of her exhibits was Pasadena Museum of Art, Design 11. Maybe some of you remember those exhibits. And that's my page. And then I said, Frances must have a page. Next. And sure enough, she does. And that's Marcia Donahue, artist in Berkeley, who was very close and fond of Frances. And she is wearing the print that I found in Design 11 catalog. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Alastair, who will be presenting next, and you will be thrilled. Alastair Johnston's background is in writing, typography, and fine press printing. Yes, he continues Pultoon Press, and we're very pleased about that. However, he is also an expert in world music. He was historical consultant and producer on the film The Rumba Kings and compiler of the 3 LP set of Congolese rumba ngoma, the soul of Congo. I suggest you look for those things and you will be delighted. Alastair, you're next. Thank you so much, and thank you, Julie.
In 1974, I moved to the Bay Area to be part of the small press movement that was producing handcrafted books of poetry. I met Frances Butler in 1975, and we collaborated on 4 broadsides, and we decided to start our own press. It was a case of opposites attract. One of our early shows was titled A Bale of Direct Contraries, but we both loved literature and art, and I have to say, although I was an accomplished letterpress printer, I learned everything I know about modern typography from Frances. Frances had already achieved a lot as a textile artist and was a skilled calligrapher and graphic designer. One of her earliest designs, The Worried Man, on the left, was created as a calendar and then became her first fabric design. You can see checkerboards, Hokusai's Great Wave, and the tiny Tibetan skeleton dancer she found in a 1928 National Geographic. She loved what she called the sparkle of black and white and adapted her drawing style from simple line art she found in the Jehovah's Witnesses Watchtower and Awake magazines, as well as the headshot drawings found in the Wall Street Journal. This technique of line art and stipple avoided the halftone process, which renders images in gray tones and retained a strong black and white contrast. Our first book was called Confracti Mundi Rudera, Fragments of a Shattered World. Some of her drawings bounced off poems in my notebooks, and for others I came up with commentary. Although I am credited with author, 99% of the work is hers, and she should get all the credit. I also worked for her as an employee at Good Stuffs, printing the running yardage and 48-inch wall hangings which sold internationally and locally through a couple of active salesmen who toured department stores and craft fairs. In addition to selling printed fabric, Frances got commissions to do interiors like the Bank of America corporate headquarters in San Francisco. Look, Ma, no computers. Or an R&R hotel in Southeast Asia for which she created this wonderful running yardage, Domestic Comforts, which was also made into comforters. The people depicted are her family and friends. Portrait of her husband Jonathan with a cat was taken in their home on Adeline Street. You'll see Frances also had him photograph her feet to include herself in the image. The curtains behind him reading Emotion were hand-burnished onto gauze from 7-foot-long woodcut carved by Frances. She'd made 50 or more engineered dresses, collaged from fabric inherited from her mother and purchased locally. After laboriously cutting out daisies to applique onto checkered cloth, she hit on the idea of drawing the designs she wanted and screen printing them. A constant struggle was that the salesman suggested browns and earth tones for her yardage, not the wild magentas that you usually see. Here's a design called Heavenly Cities in 2 different colorways, though I don't think any one is more subdued than the other. Now I'd like to show you other books from the press that Frances illustrated. Sumerian Lodge by Thomas Love Peacock. Logbook by Tom Rayworth, also from 1976. The color printed by letterpress on dampened Reeves heavyweight paper with some pochoir color added by hand. A Dog's Life by Darrell Gray, 1978. This had a separate broadside of one of the poems tipped in. Instead of an Animal by Leslie Scalapino, again, Frances created original fabric for the cover and also made a coat out of it. This was put into a fancy plastic clutch purse using her laminating machine. Some commercial work, a cover for Metro Magazine, and more art for the Center for Book Arts in New York, catalog covers for Anacapa Books. The Diamond Noodle by Philip Whalen. He rejected the first set of drawings, saying he did not like the idea of illustrating the text, and that the art was fine but should have nothing to do with the contents. So Frances swapped out the images for drawings of her husband and mother and a couple seen here based on my street photography. Safe and Sound by Lucia Berlin. Lucia came over to the press every day and helped me typeset and print the book. Again, Frances created images from relief zinc plates. After her death, Lucia became one of the best-selling authors in America, and her books became popular in many languages. Here's Frances working at the press. The Vandercook on the left has a type-high bed for printing zincs. On the right, some type is locked up. On the wall are metal signs from Japan. Below, here she is dotting away at a book fair. And here are two posters advertising classes at UC Davis from 1980. She created vast numbers of posters by experimental overprinting techniques. This is for a pair of talks at Davis by architectural historians. The one on the right is printed from strips of the floor linoleum mounted on the type-high bed. New dryads are ready for your call. This was a response to the grand fashion plate books of the early 1800s, published by Miller or Orme in London. She thought of the idea of everyday clothing and how people were proud of their look. This was printed letterpress from keyline blocks in black, and then the colors were added by Pochoir, a laborious undertaking. She planned another work on boundaries called Western Excess and got as far as producing a dozen plates for it, but never managed to finish it. Our 20th anniversary was celebrated in 1995 with a retrospective in the old main building of San Francisco Public Library.
A retrospective exhibition of Poltroon Press entitled Trance and Recalcitrance, The Private Voice in the Public Realm, is running through May 31st in the South Hall, 3rd floor of the main library. The exhibit documents the individual and collective work of Poltroon's founders, Frances Butler and Alastair Johnston, two of the Bay Area's leading innovators in artists' books, who are also teachers, lecturers, and widely published writers on topics as far-ranging as gardening, world music, letter forms, popular culture, and, of course, aspects of the book. It takes both suspension of time-based culture, dreaming or trance, and resistance to prestige-based marketing strategies, recalcitrance, in order to avoid communication cliches, said Butler, explaining the exhibit's title. Butler and Johnston established Poltroon Press in 1975 with the intention to print and publish original works of literature, poetry, short stories, experimental writing, as well as books on graphic arts, typography, bibliography, design history, and subjects difficult to classify. That's a Poltroon Press retrospective at the main library through May 31st.
Now, can you talk briefly about how you both got into letterpress? What first exposed you to that?
Well, actually, Alastair was working for a printer who did university press books in Santa Barbara. And meanwhile, in Berkeley, I had taken some classes in letterpress, and I was invited to teach a class in the Bancroft Library. And so I had, it had been a year or two since I'd done any work, and I went down to refurbish my skills at a local letterpress, and Alastair was an apprentice there.
Oh.
And he and I started working
Right.
together.
What was the name of that press?
That was Wesley Tanner's
Arif
press.
Press.
Arif
Press.
Oh, yes, right.
And I had a letterpress. I had bought an old Vandercook 219, and it was in this large fabric printing company that I owned and operated at the time. And so through various misadventures, Wesley threw Alastair out onto the street, and he
Not
came
exactly.
and worked at my press.
No, that's
we
your
started it
Frances
that
once
way.
again.
Well, I think we should have a little melodrama in the
Well,
public
come on, we don't want to
library.
fight on public television, do we? Although it is cable.
It
I
is
believe
cable.
that kind of thing does happen quite a lot.
I mean, I can strangle Frances right
You can
now.
do. So she's answered your question, really, about how you got into it, or is there more to that
I
story?
have nothing more to add.
Okay, that's good, right.
This is a drawing from the catalogue of Punch and Judy with me strangling Frances, with her dog Shadow leaping and peeing while wagging her tail, which was her party trick. Shadow's, not Frances's. Finally, a book of my interviews published by another press called Hanging Quotes. I liked this early drawing by Frances, and she dictated the color scheme by email, so it was a long-distance collaboration. Amazingly, Frances also found time in the 1970s to teach at the Women's Graphic Center in Los Angeles, a school founded by Sheila de Bretteville. The women who took her classes, including Susan King and Kitty Marriott, started a group to meet after Frances left and continue their explorations of the experimental techniques she had taught them. That wall hanging is from an installation called I Used to Be an Artist, but I Couldn't Sit Still That Long. But there are so many concurrent timelines to bear in mind, we have to rewind to 1973 before Poltroon Press. While continuing to make clothing, Frances produced a series of tablecloths. These were just before Judy Chicago's dinner table, which was much discussed at the time. Starting in 1973, she made these sculptural works in cloth and metal. There were giant tablecloths, a stack of knotted tablecloths, pillow books, and collapsed tables, all of them bits of the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. The collapsing table is called Falling Waters. This one is an overheard comment about her work. The tablecloths are textured, the walls are textured, even the people are textured. There's no place to rest your eyes. No shit. And there are borders of shitting dogs, pigs, and waiters. This is a stack of stuffed shirts. Here's a children's puzzle called Fabric Dogs Depend on Outside Support. There's even a blending of poster printing and dressmaking. Working on the Vandercook proof press at Poltroon, she created many posters using layers of color. Sometimes in overprinting, she ran pieces of gauze to create a ghostly impression like a mask on the image. She later used some of this gauze, soaked in oil-based ink, to make a patchwork dress, which reminded me of Sufi garments I saw in Omdurman, Sudan. She also made reading environments for two of her books, clothing to be worn while reading. For the logbook, she created a log coat and also a headscarf filled with rocks, definitely not conducive to reading. For New Dryads, she printed some of the plates on fabric and made a dress for the reader. Then she moved to linoleum-covered wood sculptures. She created many of these, and after an exhibition, loaded them in her pickup and drove them to the dump. Fortunately, she photographed them and made this little picture book, bound in linoleum. And then she worked in carved wood, using a Dremel and a bandsaw. It's hard to recollect all the work she produced. These automatons are her Wriggling Dog series from 1992. Some had hidden motors to animate them. It's hard to juxtapose the immense amount of work she was doing simultaneously, teaching, running Good Stuffs, drawing, designing, printing in the press. After she made a deal with a New York company to have her designs printed by Boras in Sweden and marketed internationally, she discovered they were also running a discount line on cheap fabric, which they had not discussed with her, so she closed the business to protect her integrity. In the mid-1980s, Frances began building environments, starting with her own garden. Originally, she built a shadow garden. We collaborated on text to cast shadows of words on the ground that moved about with the sunlight. Here, the words are heavy and light. She liked the idea of shadows as heavy light. Here you see hot spots on the right. These were wood letters, and when they began to fall apart, she cut out plastic letters, which were suspended on screens on the trellises which she had constructed. These two decayed, so she replaced them with concrete towers with mosaics. Excess refers to overpopulation. The cement babies came from an Italian garden statuary place in South San Francisco. Commissions followed for a hospital rooftop garden in Seattle, for which she used lines from Andrew Marvell's To a Green Thought, also cut out to cast shadows, and a garden for the blind in Tennessee, which had giant braille letters made from chrome bolts, and, as I recall, it was another pastoral poem by John Donne. She worked on another pochoir book for many years called Western Excess, but never finished it. It was drawings of overbuilt environments. This was Gabriel Romano's house in Eureka, which was later dismantled. She drew borders and boundaries, which are often noticed in marginal ways, such as a cemetery gate or a chain-link fence with a hole in it. And finally, her farm in France, where she lived for the last 30 years, which she covered in mosaics of colored cement and tile. This is a good friend and neighbor Constant proffering vegetables. You can see the hollyhocks, and behind them a tile mosaic so that they are perpetual. I send her this messy shirt to wear while mixing concrete. Don't know if she got the pun. The club logo, as you see, is her initials, FCB. We didn't quite make it to 50 years as a press, but for me, it was a treasured 49 years. Thank you.
Alastair, over to you. That was gorgeous.
You saw that image of the excess babies. I used to joke that Frances's motto was nothing exceeds like excess, but even excess was never enough for her. And she also fixated on the old highwayman's challenge, your money or your life. Our 20th anniversary show at San Francisco Public, which was featured in that video, was called Trance and Recalcitrance. Recalcitrance is resistance to cultural norms, and trance is extended dreaming, which is also in a way antisocial. Frances was a proponent of dreaming, not the unconscious kind when you're asleep, but reverie, letting your subconscious drift when you're still awake, or in that hypnagogic state, that receptive state of consciousness when mental pictures are most vivid. And if you'll bear with me, I'd like to just read a little paragraph from the catalog for that show where she talks about these things. Poltroon Press was founded on the theory that a private press financed by other work and not by selling its products should not accept the formula that time is money, should not rework marketing formulae like reprinting famous authors and textual reliquaries. The phrase, your money or your life, is the ultimate threat to intelligent creativity. Our productions in all of their variety have resulted from the intensely private use of time, or the practices of both trance and recalcitrance. Years of dreamtime excursions have resulted not in the coherent, repetitive body of work, beloved of critics and collectors, but in a range of activities, from Alastair's writings on contemporary African music, as well as bibliohistories of important literary presses, to my writing on the nature of contemporary punctuation, and my expansion of the act of reading into room-sized sculptural tableaux and poetry gardens. Instead of collectibles, we've produced our own lives which are their own satisfaction, not defined by exchange for money, power, or the trappings of a glorious career. Our stance reflects a recalcitrant belief in individual agency, a position with little relevance at the moment when many people are becoming so tied to network media that one wrote in a letter to the editor, "I could not think without the internet." So she sensed that eventually artificial intelligence would replace our creativity and even our very lives.
Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you, Marla Weinhoff.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here talking about Frances. And already I'm so inspired by everything I've seen. Julie, put on the first slide, please. I first met Frances in 1977 when I was her student at UC Berkeley. She was teaching the third quarter of a graphic design course. She based the class on designing and fabricating a 4-color process book, and from the outset, it actually seemed impossible. But through her instruction, she taught us how to combine imagery and text, obviously never to the level that she did, but we got a good start. And we learned how to separate the images into dots of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. We made silk screens, printed the pages, and learned how to do bookbinding. It was incredibly complex combination of design and technique. As a teacher, she was a true inspiration. At the time, very few women were teaching at UC Berkeley, and it was definitely a hyper-masculine atmosphere in the architectural school. I was so grateful to have her as a role model. Next slide, please. I was a fan of all of Frances's work. She was unlike anyone I had ever met, and the first person I knew who had a personal book collection that was a legitimate library, all arranged methodically on metal shelving at a Good Stuff studio. It later inspired me to have my own library as well. I was also fortunate to become friends with her and Alastair, and that's how I met Alastair. And remembering one of my highlights of Berkeley years was going to a midnight showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show with both of them and learning how to throw the toast and all the other great things we did. It was really incredible. And I was used to the hippie ways of California, but meeting Alastair with his mod style was eye-opening and wonderful. And I loved seeing those pictures that he showed of the two of them in those days. I instantly recognized his artistry and talent as well, and have been an admirer of the Poltroon Press and Alastair's work for many years. After graduate school, I moved to New York and have had various design careers. I saw Frances a little bit after I'd moved when I came home, but sadly, we lost touch when she moved to France. So much has changed since our days at UC Berkeley, Davis, and Fiberworks, where all our work was relegated to the realm of craft. Times have really changed, and the current acceptable view is that any material and technique can be considered art, as evidenced by any biennale all over the world. Frances was a true artist and creator, using mixed media and obscure references. She led with her intelligence, imagination, and curiosity, taking us along on her deep and esoteric paths. I was asked to show some of her work, which we've been seeing while I'm speaking. And even though it had been 45 years when I thought back on all the work, what came to mind was her pochoir series called The New Dryads. They were fashion plates, and like, if you remember something for 45 years, you know it goes pretty deep. At the time, I knew nothing about fashion, pochoir, or the merging of poetry and images, but they made an indelible impression on me, and I'm really still thinking about it all these years later. I can appreciate them even more with the life experience I've had working in fashion. I still had to look up several words from the text, which, thank you, Ginge, I wasn't the only one to do that. Each fashion plate had so many odd details and made me realize Frances loved to observe and comment and combine things in novel ways. I love the different fashion periods and styles, from the 70s California contemporary to the almost storybook Victoriana, and from the hippie to the Grand Dame. I wish Frances was still here so I could learn some of the hidden meanings and ask a lot of questions. I do know for a fact that there was definitely magic involved in the conception and creation of these works. So I did have to look up dryad, even though I kind of knew, but I thought the definition was so beautiful, and I'm just going to read that as a final word. Dryad, a spirit that lives in the forest, wood nymph fairy. For the Greek, all of nature was instinct with life. Every tree had its dryad, and the oak was sacred to Zeus, the olive to Athene, the hay to Apollo, the myrtle to Aphrodite, the poplar to Heracles. A Sunrise Stroll with the Dryad in the Dew-Drenched Forest by Edith Wharton. So thank you for letting me speak about a beloved and cherished teacher and artist. And, you know, we were all inspired and in awe of her. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you so much. One of those wonderful dresses. And now over to Chere Lai Mah. Chere, over to you.
Thank you. So please begin. You know, I believe that with the slides, I mean, for me, I think what stays is how audacious she had. Such a capacity, such an ambition to work in so many ways. And now, even 50 years later, 40 years later, we're enveloped with her designs. I'm still dressing with the kind of checkering and detail edges that she would do. And so I was so happy that after many, many years, frankly, 40, I was able to be around her work again and discover so many new things, because I was very, I was impressed with different things when I first. So anyway, this is one of the pieces that didn't make it to the dump. And so what I find wonderful is that she would use these recalcitrant, and we'll use that word, recalcitrant materials, working with these kind of low-res ideas of incorporating geometric elements when you're doing an organic or natural form. So she's always working with problems that she's solving constantly. So next slide. When I was able to go into her garden again, so more slide changes, maybe. what's something? Do I do something?
No, it's me, and I'll go to this one. There you go.
Oh, and so you see again the grids that she's enveloping people with. And the next slide. And here again, this is the print behind me that I so love. Now, this is the garden, and we have not very good pictures to tell you about her wonderful secret garden on Carlton. This garden is called the Dictionary of Shadow Effects. And again, what I found amazing is I saw that she took this ancient, very classic technique and used it for classical images, but in a totally new way. So in the 40 years since she did these, I've become very skilled at mosaic, and no one is still producing. No one has produced pieces like hers. And what she did is she used plastic and the effects of concrete wrinkled actually make it look like a corroded old stone. She used dyed concrete, but to define the areas. But most importantly, another slide, please. She used this terrible bathroom liner, something very difficult to make drawings with, and that's what she produced, beautiful, graceful drawings with this recalcitrant material. And I'd like to read, as you see, this piece, this wonderful piece, shows the gracefulness that she was able to achieve, the beautiful line quality from these really rigid, horrible materials, and especially this wonderful skeleton, which has 0 in embedded. And then on this, the bottom of this piece, the lady, it says order, disorder, unstable categories. So I'm going to read what she wrote about her gardens. My work has been a long experiment into many techniques that show the way in which obsessive work, small decisions made in the service of an overall plan, often taking a long time, encourages the state of semi-detached reverie, encourages creative metaphoric thinking, and if given enough attention, allows for the direct reproduction of the tension field of intellectual creation on the visual plane. My garden projects involving layers of time and of structure blend language and spatial cognition with visual and body skills. Again, the ultimate goal, the Reverie Garden. And they are magical. So more slides, please. I played a little with this, Alastair. You'll see a little AI, but it's not serious. Next picture, please. Just run through them. I'm really finished with my talking part.
And this is the last, Sherry.
Good. Oh, it is. Ah, good. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Chere Lai Mah. And now for something different.
Yeah.
I can't believe the diversity that we got with all of you. Over to you, Greg Castillo, professor at the University of California, Berkeley in the Architecture School.
Thank you very much, Julie. I was, of course, incredibly fortunate to know Frances as a friend. And while I was doing my doctoral research, I happened to be in Germany, which actually is not close to France, but close enough to be able to have visited Frances several times at her amazing farm. And so, next slide, please. So I ended up doing a kind of wild first-time ride as a curator for the showing of hippie modernism, the struggle for utopia, a show that emerged from the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and then traveled to Berkeley in May 2017 in time for the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love. So it was a kind of a big event for the Bay Area and for BAMFA. And one of the things that happened was that there were a lot of installations that had been put together by Andrew Blauvelt, who originally curated the show, and they were too big to travel, and so those disappeared. And my job was to fill in showing art of the Bay Area of this period, because Andrew's orientation was more transatlantic, East Coast, East Coast in Europe. So I ended up putting together several hundred objects and images to give the California side of this story. Next slide, please. And so on the left, you see a advertisement on the outside of the museum, and on the right, one of the installations. Speaking of textiles, quite an amazing so-called family sweater by Evelyn Roth from Vancouver. This is a single garment that was made by buying thrift store sweaters, taking them all apart, and knitting a new garment, a single garment with 4 hats that a family could wear all at once. So that this is just simply one knit object that all of these mannequins are placed together in. Behind the family sweater, you see some of the things that I pulled together. Next slide, please. So this was sort of my kind of naughty boy installation, and trying to explain the ways in which people began to see things differently and use mandalas for representation. I put together a series of many different mandalas, but among them were a contemporary mandala by Gordon Ashby that you see on the left, an ancient Indian mandala on the top to give visitors an idea of what they, were comparing it with, and then a framed tiny dot below that, which you see enlarged on the right. This is literally a microdot of LSD on blotter paper. Larry Rinder, the curator, the head curator of BAMFA, said, like, oh my God, this is a state of California institution. You cannot put a drug on the wall. It's a controlled substance. But fortunately, this kind of eccentric guy who collected all of this blotter acid had already been busted by the DEA, which determined that after laboratory testing, that after 50 years of light, like nobody knew what that drug had degraded into, but it certainly wasn't LSD anymore, so it could go in the Wall Museum. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, when we think of hippie aesthetics, for example, and some psychedelic things that are far out, it's clear that LSD had some impact, but it didn't. That wasn't Frances's story. Frances really told me that she never bothered with drugs. Like, why did she need drugs? She was already out there as it was. So the first idea of being able to add some local costumes was an idea that we would place in the show some works by the genderfuck commune, an acid-fueled commune in San Francisco of a group called the Coquettes. And Fayette Hauser, a remarkable lady who is just a wild woman, even at her age now, had a costume that she called the Cosmic Gypsy. You see it in a kind of a cutout coloring book that the Coquettes put together. But unfortunately, the Cosmic Gypsy and all of the other outfits by the Coquettes were in a different show being shown at exactly the same time, Counter Couture in New York City. And then I suddenly realized, I don't need that. I know Frances Butler. She has remarkable work. So next slide, please. And here's one that we were able to show. Sorry, this is a different drag commune. This was called the Angels of Light, and this is costume that was made by an angel named Tahara, James Windsor. This is the Lila Cortez outfit from a show that they did called Watusi in San Francisco. And just as a sidebar, it's a kind of remarkable costume because it's literally sewn together from Depression-era ties that were bequeathed to James when his grandfather died. And so what does a gay drag queen do with ties from his grandfather? Of course, they make a Spanish flamingo outfit out of it. Next slide, please. But of course, the really killer installation was the installation that we were able to do with Frances's acceptance from work that she had stored in her home. So Frances, at the time we were trying to put together this exhibition, was at her farmhouse. And, Frances was really interesting in that she really did not care that much about her legacy of basically having things in museums, having things celebrated. And it took a little, in fact, convincing to get Frances to say, okay, well, go over to the house and Alastair will show you some things and see what you think. So Alastair was kind enough to open the house up to Larry Rinder from BAMFA and myself. And what he proceeded to pull out of things like windows seat boxes was like a magician's trick. These amazing objects that were perfectly preserved after 50 years were coming out, and we were just gobsmacked. So I'm showing you on the right some of the things that we ended up showing in the exhibition. Of course, this art garment, this engineered coat that's quilted, sort of shown probably in a way that Frances would never have worn it, in a very saucy way on a naked mannequin. Next slide, please. The collapsed tea table we saw earlier of fabric work. Next slide, please. The very beautiful Nippon moon landing with its sort of cultural and digital kind of mashed in visuals. And next slide, please. And the Good Stuff's printed fabric, The Worried Man, which we saw earlier. And I didn't know, Alastair, that this had begun as a calendar. And here you see that piece of fabric actually, as we were looking at it, trying to decide what we would show. And again, this was like one of the most remarkable things of seeing this work appear. And I have to confess that knowing Frances from her farm in France, I really hadn't realized the incredible variety and really the brilliance of much of this work. Next slide, please. So our installation also included Frances's textile pillow books, 2 of them. Here we're seeing Banana Man in Switzerland. We had some large tables in which we could fold out the pillow books, which fold out in a kind of a zigzag manner. And, in this portion of the exhibition that was dedicated to Frances's work, it was really wonderful to see how people would just pour over this work. And it really added an immense amount of interest to the exhibition of what was happening in the Bay Area in this time in the 1970s. Next slide, please. And here is a different color printing of that same textile, showing you, this sort of graphic novel technique, but it's a graphic novel in which you really have to invent a narrative if you want a coherent narrative for yourself, but it's best just to actually sort of glide through the sequence of images and let them create whatever impressions they do. Next slide. So here's the work of Frances being shown in that downstairs gallery. And later, thinking about Frances's work, it made me think of a book by people who lived in Canyon, who had hand-built homes, which were all illegal, and their collective memoir is called Handmade Lives. And Annie Westling writes in that, "We didn't transform society, that's for sure, but neither were we absorbed by it. In the spirit of Voltaire's Candide, We have handcrafted lives and environs that foster beauty and growth. And it seemed to me that that quote also summed up the way Frances lived. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Wow. And last but not least, Debra Rapoport, artist, friend of Frances's, over to you.
Okay, let's see. Well, that's a hard act to follow. Very emotional, very, she was one of a kind. She was brilliant. She had endless energy. I taught together with Frances at UC Davis until I left in 1978. But, I was teaching textiles, woven and printed, but Frances was teaching graphics, or whatever she was doing. I really had no idea. There was really no overlap. And although I did commute with her and Jonathan for a while until the tragic accident of 1974, I don't even remember what we talked about in the car, but between the two of them carrying on, and Jonathan was absolutely brilliant, it was all very meaningful. And the one thing I do remember with her incredible strong-willed personality. At the time, Catherine Westphal was the chairperson of our design department, and they would sometimes go at it. And I don't remember what they didn't see eye to eye, but they were the two senior faculty members, and they would. The rest of us were always very agreeable and very well behaved, but I just loved the energy. And Catherine could have a temper too. So the two of them would carry on at faculty meetings. And then in 1977, when I was working with Winder Baker and Susan Wick, who's on the Zoom with us, we were doing performance art, and we were invited to do a live window at Macy's, which had never been heard of before. And it was Mother's Day, and we were collaborating with the cellar, the department, the kitchen, the cellar. And we titled it Kitchen Motion. And we were promoting pure food and good food, and we're using all the equipment that they brought up from the cellar, a juice X and a toaster and this and that. And they brought on bushels of apples and bundles of bananas and stuff. And we would even write in the window, 100% pure. So we were wearing, and this is the one image I have, we were all wearing Frances's beautiful aprons. And we did this for like 3 days, and it was Mother's Day, and such things would happen that people would come and take a bunch of roses and tape it on the window and go like this, "For my mother in heaven." It was really outrageous and very memorable. So there's the one image. Is the image there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I'm on. Okay.
We're seeing it, and it's gorgeous.
Okay. Yeah. So it was called Toasting Kitchen Motion, Macy's display window in May 1977, BRW, Baker, Rapoport, and Wick. And there we are, a few years ago.
Deborah, thank you
You're welcome.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
This has been a profoundly moving experience to work with all of you and to learn more about Frances and really be able to see so much of her creative genius, really. So thank you all so much for participating. It's been an honor to work on this one.